I'm going to be refuting Christopher Ursula's claim, which is Troy Davis was wrongfully accused and executed for the murder of an off-duty officer. Troy Anthony Davis has been on death row for 20 years in Georgia after being convicted of murdering Savannah policeman Mark Ellen McFall in 1991. During that time, the prisoner has faced a series of reversals, and his date of execution was repeatedly set and repealed. Despite all the controversies and supporters for his innocence, he was executed on December 21st this year. Chris, in his speech, claims that Troy Davis is innocent and should not have been executed. The supporting claims are that the case has lack of evidence, waiver testimonies, Davis has a large group of people supporting his innocence, and death penalty is not the answer for the punishment. First of all, Chris appeals that the case has lack of evidence. He states that there is no physical evidence found, but only based on testimonies of witnesses. However, the federal court thinks differently. In August 2010, Chief Judge William T. Moore of the U.S. District Court in Savannah issued a ruling. He picked apart his Davis' factual claims one by one and concluded that the vast majority of the evidence at trial remains intact. So basically what it says is that Davis was present during a drive-by shooting hours before the murder of Officer McFall. Friends of Davis who testified at trial knew Davis was carrying a handgun, and Davis also admitted all this. But he blamed, by implication, his friend Mr. Coles for the murder. All witnesses at trial pointed to Davis as the shooter except for one person who testified that Mr. Cole was the shooter. It only took 2 hours for the jury to decide to announce Davis guilty. It was that easy. The fast decision. The second claim is that the Chris made was that 7 of 9 witnesses of the crime recanted, changed their statements. He presented this to support his claim, but in fact, this helped the judge to conclude Davis was guilty. Judge Moore found that his 7 recantations, only 1 is meaningful and credible. 4 of them were either not credible or not true, that it should be disregarded. The remaining 2 were presented under the most suspicious circumstances. His lawyers avoided having their claims about these supposed recantations examined by a judge by avoiding having these witnesses in court. The third claim is that Davis has almost 1 billion people believed and petitioned for his innocence. And also he has the support from famous people and international figures such as Jimmy Carter, Pope, and the former FBI directors. However, Judge Moore is an impartial authority who reviewed all the evidence in appropriate form. No one in Moore's position would want an innocent man's death on his conscience. Certainly Moore would have been a judicial hero if he set Davis free, but he didn't. It doesn't matter how many support groups Davis has, but the execution was the result of the court's pursuit of justice. Lastly, Chris brings up a point that death penalty is not acceptable for any punishment, therefore Davis should not have been executed. The important argument here is that it is not about whether or not the death penalty should be offered as the ultimate punishment for the most serious crimes. Today, 34 states, the federal government allow for a death sentence. According to Cully Stinson, a leading expert in criminal law, he wrote an article and said, those charged with the capital crimes should be offered competent and zealous defense counsel at trial and on appeal. They should receive a fair trial, and if they don't, their cases should be overturned. And if there is a conviction, the conviction survives all direct and collateral appeals, the sentence should be carried out. This is what it means to live by the law. Here, Troy Davis received a fair trial, had a competent counsel, lost his state and federal appeals, received a hearing from a federal judge on his exact claims of innocence, and lost because the judge found his evidence nothing more than smoke and mirrors, the judge said. The death penalty has been, and it will continue to be debated for years, but opposing the death penalty and choosing to support Davis' claim of innocence are two different subjects. Troy Davis was not, so here I am, I'm claiming against Christopher. Troy Anthony Davis was not wrongfully accused and executed for the murder of off-duty officer because even though there was no physical evidence, the testimonies and circumstances from the witnesses considering their recantations were sufficient to conclude Davis guilty. Davis has large supporting groups, but they still cannot prove his innocence. And death penalty and Davis innocent in the crime are very relevant. Thank you.
All right, well, you ID'd the claim and the secondary issues pretty well. I like the background data that you provided on the case. On the first point where you talked about the court ruling in 2010 on the evidence, I thought that that was pretty effective in discussing why the arguments made for Mr. Davis's innocence in the last year were problematic, and there's further analysis in that second point about the recanted witness testimony where the judge explains why, in fact, he proceeded with the decision that he did. And, in fact, there is good indication that some of the recanted testimony wasn't recanted at all, or it was not subject to evaluation, which means that the defense was not willing to come forward with the recanted testimony or the witnesses to say what was problematic there, and all of a sudden it's, just somebody says that the testimony is recanted. So I thought that that does a good job at addressing that issue that was being used to cast doubt about Mr. Davis's guilt there. The third point about widespread support for Davis, I think you do kind of make an argument that says that this is not relevant to the judicial proceedings and that we have to follow what the guidelines of the law are, and that if you want to make an argument against the death penalty, that's a separate issue than the issue of Mr. Davis's guilt, and that Mr. Davis was convicted, and you kind of have a nice summary of that whole position there. So I thought that that was pretty well explained. All right, thank you.